Shell has pulled some truly disgusting greenwashing campaigns over the years. Recently, they teamed up with the beloved science educator Carrie Byron from Mythbusters to show how super mega awesome their oil drilling platforms are.
So when Shell said, "Come on out, check out how deep water energy works," I said, sign me up. Redefining how Shell captures the oil and gas that powers our lives.
Nothing like giving your face away for a company that has systematically undermined climate action policies for over 60 years. We really wonder what the number on that paycheck was. But somehow, this isn't even close to being Shell's most disgusting marketing campaign. Over the last years, Shell started to offer its clients in the UK, the Netherlands, Canada, Germany, Switzerland, and other countries the option to get climate-neutral gas. Save the planet for 3 cents on a liter of fuel. Well, that instinctively sounds quite ridiculous, but we had to know. Is Shell going green? Can we save the world by protecting forests? Will 3 cents per liter of fuel be enough for said world saving? What's really behind these calculations? Over the past few months, we took a deep dive into the world of carbon offsets. And it's such an unbelievable mess. Manipulated numbers, massive shadowy investment funds, burning rainforests, disempowered indigenous communities, and countless false promises. Buckle up, it's about to get utterly absurd.
Forests do this totally random thing where they burn down all the time.
Can you really buy your way out of responsibility?
The basic idea behind Shell's carbon offset is this. You fill up your gas tank at Shell, which is bad for the climate. The oil needs to be extracted from the ground, then it's processed in a refinery and transported to your nearby Shell gas station. All of this generates emissions. And of course, there's also the combustion of the fuel in your car and the resulting emissions. So in several countries across the globe, you can simply spend an extra 2 to 3 cents per liter to offset your own emissions. And Shell chips in an unspecified amount of money for the rest. This money will then be used, for example, for the protection of primary forests. If Shell didn't protect these forests with that money, they claim that these trees would be cut down, which in turn would release CO2. And this potentially released CO2 that is now not being emitted, thanks to Shell, earns the oil company credits. These are also known as carbon credits. 1 credit equals 1 ton of saved CO2. These credits from preventing deforestation are then offset against the actual CO2 emissions produced through the production and consumption of the gasoline. This is how Shell wants to make their fuel carbon neutral. The framework for these genius offset calculations often revolves around REDD+. REDD stands for Reduce Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. It's a United Nations initiative that initially sounds great. The idea is that by selling carbon credits, more money will go into forest conservation. Many countries participate in this initiative, aiming to protect and revive their forests. However, there are also numerous REDD projects run by private companies. This includes 2 forest conservation projects prominently featured by Shell in their own carbon offset campaign. The first is the Cordillera Azul project in Peru, and the second is the Katingan project in Indonesia. But first, let's take a small detour. Companies like Shell often don't buy their carbon credits directly from forest conservation projects. This is where a number of peculiar middlemen come into play. The organization managing the REDD project in Peru is called CIMA. CIMA's initial primary partner was the Althelia Climate Fund. Funds like these raise significant amounts of money from investors to invest in sustainable projects. In 2014, Althelia received 8 million carbon credits from CIMA for an $8.5 million investment in the project. At that time, the Althelia Fund was indirectly based in Luxembourg, which meant it paid almost no taxes, as revealed in an investigation by Recommon. The fund received money from various sources, including the European Investment Bank, the pension fund of the Swedish Church, and the US Agency for International Development. In an older presentation, Althelia simplified its business model. Projects like Cordillera Azul in Peru receive cash for project and give carbon credits to Althelia. The project goes on to do many good things in the region. The fund sells the credits for more cash, making it a perfect, green and socially responsible investment. In 2016, Althelia established Ecosphere Plus, which serves as the company's sales platform to promote their social and green projects. Until a few months ago, you could offset 1 ton of CO2 for $17 through the calculator on their website. Currently, this calculator is no longer active, but that was the price you pay for a carbon credit from Althelia without bulk discounts. Not bad, considering that at least the first 8 million credits were purchased for around $1 each. What a profitable investment. To date, Ecosphere Plus has sold over 45 million credits. Althelia collaborates closely with sustainability titans like Eneco, Ascend, and Shell. Althelia and Ecosphere Plus now indirectly belong to the portfolio of one of the world's largest asset managers. But they are by no means the only company that has built a business in this niche. Between the green stickers and billboards of corporations like Shell and the actual jungle, a massive shadow industry of intermediaries emerged. Of course, forest conservation projects in the global south need to be marketed somehow. For many middlemen, however, trading carbon credits seems to be just a way to make fast cash. There are leaked emails about credits being sold for 7 times their purchase price. Other providers are simply scammers, not to mention some rather questionable crypto blockchain projects. The list goes on. How much money from the purchase of carbon credits actually reaches these projects is often completely unclear. But as absurd as it may sound, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's jump back to the Cordillera Azul project in Peru. The forest conservation area spans 13,500 square kilometers, which is about the size of Northern Ireland. The grey area surrounding it is the buffer zone, which is even larger at 23,000 square kilometers. Around 350,000 people live within this zone. It exists to prevent people from entering the forest and cutting it down. CIMA, the organization that Althelia does business with, is set up as a non-profit. It has been managing the area on behalf of the Peruvian government since 2008, the same year it was declared a red project. CIMA justified the supposed threat to the area based on a growing population. As in the coming decades, many people will move into the region and they will then cut down the rainforest for agriculture. To prevent this, we need money to protect the forest with additional resources. This in turn leads to a rather shaky calculation. Based on estimated population growth, a theoretical deforestation rate is calculated, which is based on the presumed future activities of hypothetical migrants. And only because CIMA's RED project would exist, all this theoretical deforestation and corresponding release of CO2 could be prevented. From 2009 to 2018, that was allegedly a full 25 million tons of prevented CO2, which can mostly be sold as carbon credits. Shell alone is said to have bought around 14 million credits from the project by early 2021. With these credits, Shell is, in part, offsetting the emissions of its customers. In reality, the area was already a protected national park long before 2008. In fact, it was declared a protected area by the Peruvian government in 2001. The buffer zone was also established back then. According to investigations by Unearthed and The Guardian, the idea that the forest would have been rapidly cut down due to a growing population is highly unlikely. They, for example, interviewed a staff member of the Peruvian Ministry for the Conservation of Natural Protected Areas who simply denied this alleged threat. Long before all of this, the rainforest was the home of at least 29 indigenous communities. These people don't cut down the forest on a large scale. They've been protecting it for generations. In countries like Peru, land ownership is often poorly regulated. Indigenous communities often don't have the necessary papers to officially claim areas for themselves. Globally, they only own 1/5 of the land on which they have always lived. According to these indigenous communities, when the park was created and the RED project was launched, their territories were simply ignored. They neither helped plan the conservation project nor agreed to trade carbon credits. In their words, we live here in the Peruvian Amazon, where there is a new boom, a new fever, just like for rubber and oil, but this time for carbon and RED. In 2020, these communities filed a lawsuit against the Peruvian state and the national park. They also submitted a petition to the United Nations. In a statement, they openly criticize companies like Shell and Total, which have purchased credits from the RED project. They strongly oppose the carbon credit trade with these polluting companies. Shell claimed on its own website that through the Cordillera Azul project they are supporting 30 indigenous communities. In fact, the company even said it had dedicated in-house specialists responsible for relationships with indigenous communities. Kinda weird. CIMA told us they had always worked together with indigenous and local communities in a collaborative and respectful manner. The organization confirmed that nearly 90% of all carbon credits from their project were sold to Shell and Total. The methods used to calculate the credits have been independently verified. CIMA stresses that all the money generated was reinvested into the project. Let's move on to the Katingan project in Indonesia, which is also prominently featured on Shell's website. This is a private red forest conservation project on the island of Borneo. Several companies and a non-profit organization are involved. The main person responsible is a former investment banker. The project has been running since 2010. It supposedly protects an impressive 1,500 square kilometers of peat swamp forest, preventing hundreds of millions of tons of CO2 from entering the atmosphere. It generates an average of 7.5 million carbon credits per year. That's as much as taking 2 million cars off the road each year. Katingan is a red poster child project. Greenpeace Germany took a closer look at it and published an outstanding investigation. In this case, the theoretical threat to the area was calculated using several reference areas. The project essentially points to these other regions and says, look how bad deforestation is there. It will be just as bad here unless we prevent it.
Im Fall des Katingan-Projektes zum Beispiel bezieht man sich da auf Regionen, in denen es tatsächlich eine starke Papierholzindustrie gibt, mit entsprechender Infrastruktur, die es aber in der Nähe des Projektgebietes gar nicht gibt.
This is Benjamin Gers from Greenpeace. 5 of the 7 reference areas are over 1,000 kilometers away from the actual project area on a completely different Indonesian island.
Das heißt, es ist nicht wirklich vergleichbar, wird aber in diesem Fall als Vergleich benutzt, um zu sagen, das droht uns hier auch.
Moreover, the pulpwood plantations in those regions are on normal soil. In Katingan, they would have to drain the peat swamp areas first, which wouldn't be worthwhile because it's too expensive. To this day, there are virtually no such plantations in the entire region. You will find many palm oil plantations and associated deforestation in the region. But the project area and large parts of the region were already declared protected areas in 2011 by the former Indonesian president. Plantations of any kind are prohibited here. Nevertheless, the project claimed on its website that the entire area was threatened by the pulpwood industry. And based on this highly questionable assumption, the RED project sells millions of carbon credits, for example to Shell and for a long time to Volkswagen. Reportedly, there are numerous other problems with the project, including conflicts with the local population.
Also für die Bevölkerung vor Ort, das zeigen Studien, hat sich die Situation im Wesentlichen verschlechtert.
Permian Global, one of the operators of the Katingan project, calls the Greenpeace investigation incorrect and unbalanced. In an analysis of the Greenpeace report, Permian Global, however, once again leaves out significant discrepancies related to pulpwood plantations and government regulations. Crucial points are quickly brushed aside. You can find more details on this in our sources. According to Permian Global, carbon credits should only be used by companies that also pursue ambitious, scientifically based strategies to reduce their emissions. According to this logic, Shell would also belong to that category since credits are sold to them. Indirectly calling that company an ambitious fighter for our climate is pretty wild. Now, one might think, Okay, these two red projects are exceptions. Shell just happens to get carbon credits from two bad actors. Unfortunately, that's not the case. To start, a major study showed that 40 selected red projects could substantially reduce deforestation and degradation in their areas. On the other hand, researchers in a 2020 study took a closer look at 12 other red projects in the Brazilian Amazon. They found no significant evidence that these red projects had reduced forest loss. A study from 2014 found that 108 out of 410 analyzed red projects were partially protected areas already. Norway is one of the largest buyers of carbon credits. In 2018, the country assessed the risk of its investments. The overall red concept performed poorly. Weak implementations, inadequate oversight, shaky models. There's a lot of other criticism of various specific red projects. This includes German investigations into an afforestation project in Uruguay that is in reality a timber plantation, supported by companies like Aldi. There's also this article about forests in the US that were already under solid nature protection before the projects began. Another story highlights exploitative contracts in the Congo. Now, you might be wondering who actually monitors all these projects. Most private red projects are certified by both VCS and CCBS. Both are meant to demonstrate that the forest and biodiversity are protected and the project is beneficial for the local people. Both certificates come from Verra, a non-profit organization founded in 2007. Verra is the largest issuer of carbon credits and has certified over 1 billion credits to date. That's more than Germany's annual emissions. The organization responds quite critically when their methods are criticized. In the past, they've published harsh statements regarding articles from The Guardian and Unearthed, ProPublica, German Public Broadcasting, NPR, and Last Week Tonight. The general tone is that these journalists simply don't understand Verra's methods. They supposedly ignore important connections and even harm forest conservation with their reporting. But without acknowledging the criticism, Verra has fundamentally changed its basis for calculating carbon credits from red projects in recent years. The reference areas where significant cheating can happen are completely eliminated and replaced by a different system. All VCS certified projects must adapt accordingly. 10 months ago, The Guardian, the German newspaper Zeit, and the non-profit Source Material dropped the most brutal reporting on Verra's work yet. According to two major studies, 90% of Verra's rainforest carbon credits might not represent real emission reductions. In Zeit's words, they are nothing more than a heap of junk. Verra, in their usual fashion, criticizes the reporting harshly. Okay, but for the fun of it, let's just entertain the following thought for a minute. All of Shell's carbon credits are entirely legitimate, and these red projects did in fact save all that CO2. Can 3 cents per liter of fuel compensate for the emissions generated? Burning 1 liter of gasoline releases about 2.3 kilograms of CO2. That means we could offset 1 ton of CO2 for less than $15. That number is plain absurd. Serious scientific calculations put the cost of a ton of CO2 for society at about $220. That's 15 times what you pay at the gas pump at Shell. And then you'd have to trust the company to offset the extraction, production, and transportation of the fuel. They claim they do that, but how the company calculates these massive remaining emissions and how much they pay for them is entirely unclear. Forests alone cannot save our climate. Trees don't just store CO2, they release it when they die. Large parts of global forests are threatened by climate change. For example, the area of the project in Peru is becoming increasingly dry. The forest there could change in such a way that it permanently stores way less CO2. Additionally, there are more and more forest fires due to extended dry periods. The bitter irony of these offset forest conservation projects is that they justify further greenhouse gas emissions, which in turn makes the survival of the same forests ever more unlikely. Forests in the global south urgently need protection, and areas need to be reforested. This requires massive support from industrialized nations, but according to numerous experts, this support should not be tied to carbon credits. the vast majority of global greenhouse gases comes from the energy sector. Swiftly transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy is by far the most important measure in the fight against climate change. Green rainforest stickers at gas pumps or bold claims on billboards can quickly divert attention. But wait, maybe that's exactly...
It would be great if they were as green as they claimed. Everyone would love that.
This is Faye Holder. She works at Influence Map, an independent think tank that analyzes lobbying and climate policy. In Faye's view, Shell's offset campaign at its gas stations is simply a distraction.
They're using key buzzwords that you know to be good, things like carbon neutral and net zero. And so it's distracting really from what the solutions actually are, as well as distracting from the need for policy.
Furthermore, the responsibility for a greener lifestyle is shifted onto individuals. It's like saying, better fill up your tank in a climate-neutral way because your personal carbon footprint is so high.
This is not on individuals to try figure out on their own or just solve. We really need the climate policy to enable an environment where you can make positive choices.
The personal carbon footprint was popularized by the oil company BP to shift responsibility to individuals instead of focusing on the large-scale solution, which is the same since decades. Their core business must end ASAP. Shell's campaign clearly demonstrates how challenging it often is to address climate change on an individual basis. It promises a lot to the customer, but no one can verify if the promises on those green stickers are really true, unless you're a couple of odd YouTubers with nothing better to do. Wouldn't it make more sense to regulate claims such as climate neutral in a clear manner? You know, something like,
okay, you can't make this claim because technically it's not accurate.
In the Netherlands, it was determined that Shell's marketing claim was misleading and subsequently banned. Even Vera, in response to our inquiry, states that carbon credits should not be freely used to imply climate neutrality. Publicly, Shell supports climate projects and the expansion of renewable energy. Meanwhile, the company has funded lobby groups that torpedoed the transition to green energy for decades. All the while, Shell's top executives have known about the existence of man-made global warming since the late 1950s. Good to keep that in mind when current emissions are labeled as unavoidable on Shell's website. In 2021, Shell put only 1.5% of its total budget into renewable energy. By 2030, they plan to invest $2 to $3 billion per year in renewable energy and energy solutions. At the same time, the company plans to spend around $12 billion for exploring and producing more oil and gas. Shell is not alone in this. A major study examined the green promises of oil companies. And surprise, in almost all cases, the promises do not align with actual investments. Shell and the fossil fuel industry at large will remain extremely dependent on digging stuff out of the ground for the foreseeable future. A rapid and determined transformation of the energy system would not be so great for them.
That's what they're scared of because that's what's going to end their business.
We asked Shell for comment. We have not received a response. But criticism of the carbon credit business seems to have had an effect. In October 2023, Shell CEO Val Savan announced that the company has given up their targets for carbon offsets. Instead of investing around $100 million a year on offsets and using the CO2 compensation credits, Shell plans to continue to drive the Nature-Based Solutions organization. Shell's campaign is just one manifestation of an incredibly concerning trend. The market for voluntary carbon credits is exploding. It has reached a value of about $2 billion in 2021. It is estimated that it will reach $50 billion by 2030. Numerous major corporations are under immense pressure to appear green. For many, carbon credits are a way to fulfill their grand net zero promises.
At Total, we are contributing to the energy transition.
Apple is going carbon neutral.
Our ambition is to be a net zero emissions energy business.
Yes, zero.
On the other side, there are plenty of initiatives and NGOs in developing countries in need of funding. And in the middle lies a vast pool of intermediaries and auditors. All these stakeholders have an interest in issuing as many credits as possible. companies ultimately want to offset as many emissions as possible at the lowest cost. Private intermediaries want to sell as many credits as possible and make a profit. Projects want to appear as attractive as possible to investors, hence preventing as many alleged emissions as possible. All of this makes red projects so tempting, an incredible number of carbon credits for very little money. At the same time, in many cases, they are just not credible. And according to many experts, they are based on a fundamental misconception about offsetting emissions through forests. Red ultimately shifts the pressure in the wrong direction.